trends in 2022. Thank you for being here. My name is Greg Bauch. I'm the content production specialist here at Mongoose. This is Mike Kochczynski. Mike, why don't you tell people who you are?
Yes, I'm a client success lead and partner manager. So I work with a number of our client institutions and also our partners as well.
All right, awesome. So we want to talk about, once again, trends. If we were talking about pop culture, according to the Super Bowl, we would be talking about electric cars and alcoholic flavored seltzers.
And crypto.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
But that's not what we're doing. That's a different webinar for a different day. This is for your institution. So when the discussion is higher ed, Mike and I are forced to kind of start on a down note because the trend in higher ed is going to lead us to talking about enrollment and the decline, a 3.5% decline in enrollment since fall of 2021. So it's kind of hard, but we have to start with that before we start setting up the trends, Mike.
Right. And keep in mind too, we have the 2025, the scary demographic cliff, the 15% of the high school population in America decreasing as well. But there is some silver lining there. Most institutions are pivoting to grad programs if they can, to lifelong learning, certifications, other ways to build up that headcount if they can't get it through the traditional student means as well, which is good.
We still have people filing in. So if you're just joining us again, we have just got it started. Thank you for joining us here on For Your Institution 2025. So you're saying there's going to be less high school students?
Correct.
So there's less people? Like they can predict that there's going to be less high school students in 2025?
There will be less high school students. So in 2008, we had the, that financial crisis. There's like several movies about it.
I heard about that.
Yes. Yeah. There's the Wall Street, Lehman Brothers, something. So anyway, yeah, not as many children being produced, frankly. So because that didn't happen in the early 2000s, there won't be as many high school students. But again, the good news is we have graduate students, we have adult learners or quote unquote non-traditional students that are helping to fill that gap. Many schools are creating boot camps and certification programs. They're putting content online where they can, some of that gated, some of it ungated. Notably, Harvard does a great job with their ungated content. They have the resources to do that. But yeah, there's lots of ways to mitigate that, frankly.
Higher ed's fascinating. I'm not exactly new to higher ed. I am generally new compared to, like, for instance, Mike, myself, and many people watching. But the things you have to pay attention to in higher ed, things like population and things like that, are fascinating. So still more people filing into our conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for everyone who has their camera on. We love to see our audience. We love to see the people we're speaking to in that sense. So this is about trends. We start to talk about like declines in enrollment, but increases in grad students and such. We can also talk about something that is also not positive, and that is the continued pandemic and how sick I am of talking about it, but it is a reality. That's kind of led the way to advances in what people have to do within their job. Like if you're in higher ed, no matter what department you're in, you're pulled in so many different directions. And all of a sudden you had to become an expert on things like virtual events, hybrid learning, just technology, Zoom technology, things like that. That hasn't changed, but people have gotten better. Let's talk about just, pin it on virtual events and that trend in 2022 and what you see out of that.
Absolutely. So there's been all sorts of phrasing. Some people say virtual is here to stay. I'm a big believer that hybrid is here to stay. So putting your content out in a way that where it can be, virtual, digital, et cetera, but can also be consumed on campus is very, very important. So there are going to be things that you want to be standardized, your information sessions, if you're in enrollment, the type of language you have around campaigns, et cetera. You'll want to do that in a virtual or perhaps in a digital way. If you have a call center, et cetera, you'll do those sorts of things. But what this also has allowed us to do is to be more intentional about the on-campus experience. So if we're in enrollment, that means thinking more about a welcome center. And if I am a prospective student, having a very central, easy to get to location where I can park, I can meet with my advisor, counselor if I'm an alumnus or alumna, where I can meet with the alumni office or annual giving or career services, et cetera. So putting all these external offices in one and making sure you're coordinating the experience. You'll also see similar things happen with the current student experience. If your institution hasn't already, it's probably coming, I would say, where you're going to see the student services offices, if they're not all under one roof or all under one leadership funnel or silo, I guess, if you will, you're going to start to see that as well. And you also see more collaboration too.
So those adjustments can be started, like you have to talking about a trend in 2022, you're completely changing the landscape of like school visits. You're not talking about that. Like there's still going to be school visits, campus visits and things like that, but there are things you can be doing now to improve how you present your school virtually.
Yeah, we're going to talk a lot about authenticity and intentionality. And so it's more about refining those experiences to make sure that students are getting what you want them to get out of those experiences.
Okay, so again, people still filing in. We appreciate that. Welcome to For Your Institution and our talk on higher ed trends in 2022. If you've joined us a little bit late, it will be recorded and sent to you. I wanted to talk about not just virtual, but also like live streamed. We talked about remote and hybrid learning and how that is something that is not going away in professional life, in higher education, in every walk of life. COVID and the pandemic has really taught us a lesson. Is that these jobs, this education, it can be done online, and therefore this next generation is going to expect, if it can be done online, that it should be done online.
Yeah, students are looking for a hybrid experience. Again, some of those experiences are going to be in a classroom and a lab. Some of that might be concurrent and online. And I would say that faculty have done a very good job of adapting to that reality and creating their lessons, their lectures, et cetera, to be very consumable online in Teams or in Zoom, et cetera. And if we can take one step back too, and we talk about the prospective student experience, this was a mind-blowing stat I learned last week from a VP at a Midwest institution. So he was explaining to me that the average college visit is cost a family about $2,000. I couldn't believe that number. That seemed extraordinarily high. So I Googled it and looked into it. And I think he was actually citing an article from 2015. So those costs have probably gone up. So the emphasis of taking the campus to the student, as opposed to expecting the student to demonstrate interest by coming to you, is going to be an important trend to think about.
And it's not just virtual. It's not just an event where you welcome 200 people via Zoom to a certain event that you're hosting.
Right.
You can also use video in other ways. It's kind of going to get us into marketing, something near and dear to my heart. I mean, I love my family more than my job, but I am marketing and I think about marketing all the time. Video is super important, and you can incorporate videos into all of your channels. So it isn't just hosting a live event. It is replying to students and making your social channels filled with video and other ways to present the good things about your school. And for current students, also just explaining processes and things about your school.
Absolutely. And it's important to think that you align your content with your channels, right? So we know prospective students are probably not on Facebook. They might be on Twitter, probably not on LinkedIn.
Rachel just shook her head like they're not on Twitter.
But parents are on LinkedIn. So there's going to be different messages. So the Super Bowl just happened this Sunday. We're in the middle of the Olympics. So if you have students who are athletes in those events, or are part of the production teams, or the landscaper at where was the SoFi Stadium this year, you do
I have
those sorts
no
of
idea
things
what you're talking about.
for the Super Bowl. The stadium where they were.
The landscaper was from SoFi. Mike knows where the landscaper was.
The stadium.
Okay.
Gotcha. So whatever those things are, you should be talking about those things. And if you want prospective students to hear about them, those should be accessible on Instagram and on TikTok and maybe YouTube. Things that you want parents to know about should be on LinkedIn. They should be on Twitter. They should be on Facebook. But aligning your audiences with your content, with your channels, is going to be very important moving forward.
I hate TikTok.
Yeah.
There's a pin on my presentation that talked about how your school is going to need to be on TikTok and YouTube. Mm-hmm. And I am, as the kids say, an old. I get teased if I walk through the mall because of the sneakers I'm wearing. They're usually white New Balances, but that's my demographic. I was born with a camcorder, so I'm no stranger to getting in front of a camcorder. We would mess around on that kind of stuff. But YouTube is terrifying. I was convinced to start a YouTube account, and I realized this is different from an institution standpoint, from a personal standpoint. But whether your school is going to need to be on TikTok if you want your social game to be on point. That we're not going to argue about. if you're tasked with either taking on a TikTok account, improving your personal or your school's TikTok account, or whether or not to start one, the answer is yes, you need to start one. It's a tough medium to tackle. And I will tell you, just from a personal experience, you go on TikTok, it's such nonsense. I couldn't even grasp it. But there's an algorithm that has to catch up to activities. And I find that's really tough to tackle.
Right. Now, the good news is the algorithm is very powerful and tends to be fairly accurate once you put in that work. So for the students who want that content about your institution and about the college admissions process, eventually it's going to lead them down a road that brings them to your school's content. In particular, two schools I want to call out that do a great job on TikTok: Tulane University and Lehigh. I always feel like I say Lehigh wrong. But in Pennsylvania, just outside Allentown there.
I've been to Lehigh.
Yeah, beautiful school. Yeah, beautiful campus.
Go Iron Pigs, if you like minor league baseball.
AAA. So where was I going with this? So they both do a great job with content. So both institutions do a good job explaining the admissions process. They explain things that you should do and should not do. For example, both schools make fun of essays that mention other institutions. So a student says, I've always wanted to attend Vanderbilt on accident instead of Tulane. So putting those sorts of things, reminding students don't do that. Very clever. And both schools do a great job of showing the current student experience. And to your point about video, you don't need a lot of production, ring lights, et cetera.
That's true.
Students can hold their phone and get coffee or go to an athletic event. And in fact, a lot of times that content is preferable because it comes off more authentic and more poignant for people.
I have to reset what we're doing because Mike and we get excited. It's impossible not to be excited when you're next to Mike Kochczynski. So I might tend to talk fast. I'm trying to slow down as I'm talking right now, so I don't do that. I want to tell you that if you have questions, we're going to be answering your questions. Jessica Stonish is also throwing some trend tips in the chat, so make sure you check those out. Jessica loves the TikTok. They're always trying to get me to do the TikToks as part of the marketing team here at Mongoose, and I'm always sick that day for some reason, because again, every time I go on there, it's just people lip syncing to movie quotes, and that drives me crazy. So, but the kids love it, so you do need to be doing it. So you talked about a great example, taking it was educational yet humorous. Students are making mistakes when they're filling out the essays and addressing it to the wrong school. So that's like kind of tough. So that's like you have to handle that differently. But if you handle it with humor and teach a student something, that's a good way to tackle social media. What about students themselves? I think that if you're talking to students and you're a guy like me that's out of touch, using students in social media is probably a good practice, because who else better to talk to students than the students themselves?
I'd agreed. And I think one of the things we often forget about in social media is, for example, we look at like UMBC when they beat Virginia in the NCAA tournament 4 years ago, I believe it was. Everyone followed their Twitter page, and it was very funny and very humorous. And they did great. And they talked about the applications, and they did everything they needed to do. But a really powerful part of social media is also the social listening component, and listening to what prospective students and current students are telling you on those media, because generally they're going to be a little bit more blunt, a little bit more honest with you, and you can really dig into what the systemic issues on your campus might be.
The go-to place when you're talking about social media and examples is usually athletics. And that's tough because not every school has athletics at the forefront of their institution. So you can't always just go to sports. Not every school has a player in the Super Bowl. So you have to find what works on your campus and talking to your students. So you have to be ingrained into the culture of your school. And it's a word that you mentioned off the bat. We said we'd keep going back to it. I'll go back to it right now. And that is authenticity and being real with your students, addressing problems on your campus that, if you're trying to attract prospective students to your campus, not glossing over things that might be challenges, but like tackling them head on. Being authentic in social media is more important than having an influencer that you can utilize in your social media campaigns.
Absolutely. And coaches, to your point in athletics, coaches have to find pipelines. They have to find assets to talk about at their institution. So it's a very good place to think about, we have the oldest continuous running, baseball field in North America, like whatever that is. There are people who love that content and want to know it. And so athletics is definitely a good place to listen to those messages.
We talk about conversational marketing a lot here at Mongoose. Again, it's a topic that I like to talk about myself, and it's really more about your audience than what you do. And Generation Z, there's a lot of stereotypes about Generation Z, TikTok, for example, but they have really put us on task in getting to the point. I should have gotten to the point in what I'm saying right now 15 seconds ago, because if Gen Z was listening, they'd be out. It's not making the consumer, the students, your audience wait. It's getting to the point. It's personalizing what you do. That's conversational marketing. It's really just putting your audience's needs at the forefront. So one part of conversational marketing is, of course, chatbots, web chat. Whether or not your school has that tool, if your school does have that tool, you have to be utilizing it the right way. We're here to help with that. We love to talk about that. If you're considering whether or not to get web chat or a chatbot, you should know that you're going to be competing with schools that have that if you're not already, because that's something that is definitely at the forefront of what schools are doing in 2022.
Absolutely. And the best conversational marketing routes the easy stuff to an article, to a registration form, to an application, et cetera, and then routes the more difficult human stuff to a human. So ultimately, we don't want people to take on jobs that technology can do for them. Most people who work in this industry, most people who are on this series today, I would imagine got into higher education because they really like people and care about outcomes and creating a better world. So moving people into a direction where they can do that, I think, is a really important component of conversational marketing.
Yeah, and I realize our audience today, you might not have the power to like, oh, that sounds like a cool idea, I'm just going to do that. You might not have the power to enact tips. You might not have the power to take any tool you want and just immediately enact it on your campus. What you can do is take the tools you have and make sure you're using them most effectively. If forms are something your website has to have, just make sure that they're as short as possible and you're not putting up as big a wall to students, because people don't want to, the stat that we get all the time from RNL is, I think it's 40% of students stop filling out a form because it asks too much information.
Wow.
That doesn't even include the students who saw the form and immediately went away without even trying it, because people don't like forms. Just put that in your own walk of life. And when you've come across forms, when you're trying to find out information on couches, like no one likes forms. So if you have to do that, just make sure they're as short as possible and make sure that your response time to any request are as fast as possible. That's kind of conversational marketing too, just making sure you're making your audience a priority. There is definitely a trend that's happening, not only in the world, but certainly higher education. And it's something that, we hear about all the time. And at Mongoose, we work with over 700 schools, and we're always trying to help them out. And we get questions on things a lot. And one of the questions is helping students through mental health problems with a growing pandemic. I don't know if it's growing, it's just ongoing. Life has changed. Mental health issues, it shouldn't have taken that long for it to be as accepted to talk about mental health issues as it is now. I'm glad that it is something that people might feel more freely to talk about now, but it isn't something that people will raise their hand and ask for help for. So we get questions, how do we help students through mental health issues? Such a broad question.
It seriously is, yeah.
So I would say the main thing, we're not mental health professionals, myself or Mike, and this is an informational conversation. But I do know this, that if you have resources at your school, or if you can share resources with your students, just to make them as present as possible, to make them as findable as possible. Findable is not the word, but always make those resources available to students is the main point.
Absolutely. And again, driving them to a human who can handle those things. So some of that might be human processes, teaching faculty and staff how to perhaps respond to a student who has, whatever mental health questions or concerns they might have, teaching them how to bring people to, a counseling center on campus, teaching students how they can go to this particular site. But it's also being proactive too, and understanding that there are going to be triggers throughout the academic year. And actually the calendar year too.
Pay attention to the calendar is one thing. And it doesn't even have to be, Mike, and I'm jumping on your point just to make sure I say this. It doesn't even have to be. Exam week is a great time to pay attention to your calendar and when students might need more help, because there might be higher stress. You don't have to even use the words mental healthness. You don't even have to frame it like that. You can just send out a text during exam week that asks students, hey, just checking in, is everything cool? Something like that can go a long way.
Absolutely right. And then same thing too, when you think about the calendar, going back home, if you're a residential campus, that first trip back home after you've been in the residence halls can be very stressful and stressful for families too. So reaching out to all those people and kind of prepping them for those experiences is important.
I love that the questions keep coming in. I know Daniel just asked one that we're going to get to very shortly. I think this might even be the best time to do that because in the onset of our conversation, we talked about enrollment numbers going down. So obviously things are very competitive in higher ed, no matter where your school is located. So what's the best way to, I guess, tackle that? What's the best way to keep your institution successful? And that's, I guess, presenting a return on investment. That's a big thing now. Consumers, and when I say consumers, I'm talking about students, I'm talking about parents, I'm talking about your audience. They want to know that their education is worth what they're paying for your education. So showing that return on investment is very important.
Yeah, outcomes are certainly important. I'm a big believer that every school should have a mongoose.edu/parents or /outcomes, where you outline all the metrics that you're proud of. If you are Goucher College and you're outside Baltimore, Maryland, and you want to talk about how every student has a study abroad experience, great. There are students and parents who want that. There are students and parents who don't want that. So being very authentic about those things, calling out notable alumni, calling out signature academic programs. In fact, if you can, if faculty are amenable to it, and I bet you'll find they usually will be, recording a particular lecture in a signature program. So parents and even alumni, everybody can kind of like see what is it about this community? What is it about this institution that makes us special, and calling that all out, I think, is very important. A really good exercise I've heard recently came from an institution on the West Coast. And so every few months, a couple times a year, they sit down various constituents and they say, a degree from this institution, what does that promise? What is, somebody called out the Goucher. I love it. Go Gophers. So somebody on the West Coast told me that every so often this institution will sit down these constituents and they'll say, what does this degree promise you? Like, what is the experience that you got as a student? What does it mean to be an alumnus or alumna of this institution? And they're constantly refining that and saying, okay, well, this is what we promised our students, and this is what they're getting as current students. This is what they're getting as alumni. And they find those gaps. So particularly with alumni, a lot of times we reach out to them and we think, well, it's giving day. We're raising money for the school, or we want to tell them about this event. Did we tell them about career services? Did we tell them about this amazing network of people who work in this industry that can help them break into computer science, et cetera? So thinking about being more centered on the various populations you serve and serving them is a really, really good exercise.
I love NPR, and I believe Andy just shared an article for NPR. So thanks for that. There's an article in the chat that Andy just shared. It's a community. I love that. So definitely something to check out there. And the questions keep coming in. We enjoy those. So talking about a return on investment, you mentioned something interesting, and that's how this is not a 2022 trend, but it's definitely something in the last 5 years, and it deals with conversational marketing, and that's keeping things behind a curtain. It used to be that you can keep all of your resources behind a curtain and people would bend over backwards to knock down that curtain to get what you have.
Right. Making
things available to students at the risk of giving something away for free is something that you need to be doing. I think of, like you talked about making those things available to students. That's definitely a good way to entice it. And it doesn't even have to be from an enrollment standpoint, helping out students by making lectures available, or at least outlines of lectures available before they happen. That's something that we can dive into, like virtually, like using video, using virtual to give something to students ahead of time to help them prepare.
Right. And if we're smart about the delivery mechanisms on that too, there's all sorts of beautiful data that comes out of that. Like when do people stop watching? What sections do they like the most? What links are people clicking on the most? And then again, it helps us better refine our message to reach the students most interested in our institution, or alumni most interested in giving, or students who want this particular experience or these particular resources.
Jessica, we're going to start to get into questions in just a second. I wanted to ask, do you want to talk about testing and admissions and whether that testing is becoming optional and schools are starting to have to deal with that on the horizon as well?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So I would think most of the folks on this call are probably at test optional institutions. About just under 3/4 of schools are test optional now at this point. It's been very interesting. So I'm a big believer that while COVID was a game changer, it was also an accelerant. So we were already moving in the direction of being test optional as an industry, and COVID certainly accelerated that. And some people, believe that that comes from looking at outcomes at the institutions and realizing, this correlation that we thought existed between the ACT, SAT over here and graduating from our institution over here doesn't align as well as we thought. Some of that comes from a more authentic approach towards diversity, equity, inclusion, also belonging and justice. So all that is good. So I would say that the test optional movement is probably going to keep growing. I don't know when it's going to stop. I don't know if, I don't know if the College Board is necessarily going to erode. Obviously, they've moved to a virtual testing experience, an e-test experience, but that test and the experience that students had with it is going to change fundamentally. It's also going to change how how institutions procure student list. More vendors are probably going to pop up to probably fill that vacuum that was left behind by the College Board and other vendors who are using standardized testing. So it's really going to change the landscape. It's also going to change maybe how we measure or we anticipate our students coming to our campus too, and how we vet out what's the best opportunity for them, what makes the most sense, what path is the right path for them.
Change is scary,
Yes.
But it sounds like something like that could better serve more people, which would be healthier for your institution, and probably more important than that, healthier for the community at large, which is important. Let's get into questions, Mike. I know we just talked for a long time.
Yes.
And I want to allow some other people to get their questions in. Once again, in the chat, Jessica is going to be monitoring these. So if you have a question, fire away. There might be something we touched on that you want more information on. There might be something you just want to bring up as a talking point, or there might be something we missed.
Are people able to go on and verbally ask as well?
Yeah, they can do that if you'd want to. You don't have to do that.
Unmute, feel free.
Jessica will be running the wheels on that. So Jessica, do we have any questions in the queue?
Yep. So our first question that came in was about social media. So we had a lot of great questions about social media. We talked a lot about Gen Z. So what do we recommend for older audiences and mid-career individuals? I do want to touch, because I know you hate TikTok, Greg, but I do want to touch on TikTok. I know boomers on TikTok. I know Gen Xers on TikTok. I know millennials on TikTok. It's not exclusive for Gen Z. And the amazing thing about TikTok is the algorithm is truly so accurate that if you have somebody who's on there who's looking at higher ed, and maybe they're looking at community colleges, maybe they're looking at night classes, TikTok knows these things, and your content has a really good chance of getting to those audiences. So that's my little TikTok soapbox. But what other suggestions, the clock app, what other suggestions do we have around social media for older audiences and mid-career individuals?
Yeah.
Well, I'll say first, when you talk about older audiences, parents are definitely something you have to take into account. They will be researching schools as much as the students are. So make sure that whatever media you're using, we just talked to a school that does print media, which is very expensive and hard to maintain, but print media reaches parents when you can't reach parents by texting sometimes, because you're texting the kid's phone, or you could be texting, I say kid, there could be a 40-year-old student too, but the texting is directly to a phone. Mailers go to the house. So parents might see that it's a different avenue. So make sure you're addressing everyone. And, we talk about how important personalization is. With some of your media, you might be talking to parents too.
Yeah. I think one of the media we didn't bring up, or a medium we didn't bring up, is also Reddit. And doing some social listening there and seeing what people are saying about your community, saying about your school too. Because again, if people, read that, there's crime in this area, or that, the food's terrible in this region, or whatever, the weather is awful, like knowing all those things that people are saying about your community and about your institution, if you have a subreddit specifically for your institution, all very helpful. For not quote unquote non-traditional students, when we talk about adult learners too, like I said, LinkedIn is really good. Any type of user groups, listservs as well. There's a listserv that I'm on as somebody who used to work in sports, where I get all these industry stories every Sunday. I've seen a huge uptick in institutions, and not small institutions. We're talking top 50 institutions that are putting ads in that newsletter saying, hey, if you ever wanted to break into sports, this is an online degree you can pursue, or this is a certification you can pursue. So thinking about those channels, I think, is very important.
Are you thinking about making the jump into sports, Mike?
I made the jump out of sports, so probably not jumping back in.
It's better for your knees.
Yes.
The 6-inch screw in my foot got me out of running. All right, Jessica, what's our next question?
Kind of spinning off of that, I'm going to jump to a more recent question. So we've been talking about how to best tailor our messaging to students and parents, and making sure that we're on channels that parents are on, and we're on channels that students are on. Is it best to invest more to parents or students when looking at a traditional age market?
I think it depends on where you want to improve your, I don't like the term funnel, but to be cliche, where you're trying to enhance your funnel. So parents play a big role on the front end in terms of the institutions that a student might look at. So will families, so will school staff, their friends, et cetera. And then obviously, because many parents will help financially if they can with the particular student, they will be very important at the bottom of the funnel too. So if you're trying to build the number of leads, if you will, students who filled out inquiry cards, et cetera, you're going to spend probably more money on parents there. If your work is more on the yield side of things, you're probably going to do both. And it's more about sending the right information to the right channel. So there's been a lot of great questions about outcomes and salaries, et cetera. You would feed that kind of information this time of year to parents, and as opposed to students. But for students, it might be more about the experience, and more about, we have this hybrid experience, or we have, the best dorms in New Jersey, whatever it might be.
Mike's answer was better than anything I would have said. So we'll go to the next question.
So we had another question about forms. So how do you make your inquiry form shorter when your CRM requires quite a bit of information to create a record? And we had another comment come in, thanks Kim, that if you have single sign-on enabled, it will import a lot of their information. This question is specifically about a student's or a parent's initial inquiry. So you don't have any information about this person. You're collecting all of it for the first time. What would you recommend as the method with the least friction, I would say, to collect that information so that the CRM can make a contact record?
I'm frustrated because I went single sign-on immediately. That was my first thought. But there's information that is required, and then there's information that is wanted. And so figuring out what information do we really need to move this student along in the process. So there's going to be a time where you just are going to get all that information, probably in the application process. But yeah, for the inquiry form, maybe it's less about, zip code right now. Maybe it's less about capturing email and more about mobile, those sorts of things. As an institution, you have to figure that out and what that right balance is. But some institutions I know from my time in recruiting, there are some stalwart recruiters who pre-filled out high school name and did those sorts of things, and county on forms, which I thought that's way more effort than I ever wanted to put in as a recruiter. But those sorts of things could be pre-done as well.
And a lot of it about is, the data is so important, and I'm glad you brought up data. That's something I meant to mention earlier, and just how important it is to use data, specifically if you're texting, but in any any communication you're doing, how important data is. Using that information to personalize your messaging as much as possible. So we realize that getting that data is super important, and you might not be able to control how your school does it, but just making that as unobtrusive as possible is good. So hopefully Mike's answer did a good job of that. That it's tough pre-filling it in. Do you have the time to do that kind of thing? That's tough. I know your calendars are stocked. Jess, is there another question?
Yes. So, Mike, I'm actually really interested to hear your answer to this one.
Okay.
So it seems like more presidents are stepping down this year than in a normal year. Why do you think that is? And what do you think the implications are?
Oh, so I don't know if we have any college presidents on today's webinar, or former college presidents on the webinar, but it was always a tough job. And now balancing parental engagement, balancing the contracts and name, image, and likeness in athletics, and balancing regulatory environments and funding environments. It has never been more stressful to be a college president. So I think that is part of it. I also think when we look at just the demographics of the working population too, a lot of baby boomers, frankly, are at retirement age, and they say, well, why not? And a lot of
now would be a good time to get out with
right.
more problems mounting, of course.
Right. And a lot of, Gen Xers and younger baby boomers say, yeah, I'm kind of at a point in your career where I've been the VP of enrollment at this school for 28 years. And, why not? Why don't I go for it? So I know that I think on the private side, private Catholic schools, there's about 30 openings. I know that directly because I'm working on a search at an institution, but I would think at the state level, similar things. By the way, when we talk about the state level too, one of the few things where Democrats and Republicans agree a lot is that we can cut funding in higher education. So a lot of state institutions are dealing with less state aid and needing to backfill that with international students or with out-of-state students as well. So, which obviously compounds things because then the state government says, well, you're not educating New Yorkers, so it creates this like vicious cycle. So I think that's why you're seeing a lot of presidential openings this year.
Could that position evolve as things get harder and it's harder to, I would guess, pay people to stay on and that kind of could the position itself evolve?
Perhaps. I think what I would like to see, if we had Mike Kochczynski University here, let's say, you'd still have a president, you'd still have a chancellor, but I would like to see less silos, perhaps, and more where the chief enrollment management officer is maybe at an AVP level, and you have people who make sure that these AVPs collaborate together and are less siloed. So you're taking data you're learning, you're taking all these experiential things, and you're making sure that people are on the same page. So there's a very cohesive experience. I would want there to be like a chief engagement officer on a campus if I could help it.
That's what I love about these discussions. I would have never seen that question coming, but awesome. I'm glad that it did. If you are joining us late, as some people have, you will receive a recording of this discussion. We're going to continue with the questions because I think we have more coming in. Hopefully we're doing a good job of answering them. And also, if there are no questions, it means we did such a great job that there's no questions to be had. Jessica, do we have
people away from sandwiches? So.
Oh no, eat your sandwiches by all means. Jess, is there another question?
Yeah. So swinging back to social, Kayla asked, she gave a little bit of background. So they keep their main university pages separate from admissions pages. The audiences are different. The voice is significantly different. They have a lot more room to have more liberty with voice on the admissions page. And in terms of TikTok, do we keep them separate? And is it better to just get started? If I can kick this one off, TikTok is a uniquely, if you look at the brands that are doing the best on TikTok, they have some very specifically Gen Z humor. It's very unexpected and unusual. If you look at the Duolingo page, for example, on TikTok, it's very, very popular. And any opportunity that you have to have more liberty with your voice, I would go that route. So if you know that you have you can be more liberal, you can do more unique things with your admissions brand, I would go that route. If you don't have as much freedom with your university account, I would maybe just get started with admissions. But Mike and Greg, I'd love to hear your take on it as well.
Sure. First of all, no matter what you're doing, run it by someone, run it by a team, always have someone else check it out. And that's not even if you're doing something controversial, because you could always be controversial on accident and you never want to make the news. So, run things by as many people as possible. Doesn't have to be 100, but at least 3. Just to make sure things are spelled right, for instance, and just to make sure it's actually interesting. Everything you do, ask if it's helpful. Never just do social media for the sake of doing social media.
Yes.
And that doesn't mean you can't have fun, but if you're telling students where to park for an orientation, maybe have fun with that. That's a way to have fun that's non-controversial, but it's also not just a happy Arbor Day post, because no one cares about Arbor Day. So just pay attention that you're not just creating noise, try and be helpful. There's gray areas with that where maybe you can just do a fun post for the sake of doing a fun post. But as long as you're helpful as much as possible with everything you're doing, it's going to be good and it's going to be well received. In terms of like the differences between different brands, not just brands, but also like the mediums, like for instance, Instagram, you have to be separate. You don't want to make a video for an Instagram post that's going to be the same for a TikTok post or a tweet. Each of those should have their own, like, look at what other people are doing to see what would hold well. Like, what's the difference between a reel and a post? There's 2 big differences between that. So you have to pay attention to that kind of thing too. And it's not too hard to dive in a little bit and see what people are doing to make sure that your post fits where you're putting it.
Absolutely. And there's going to be some overlap too. There's going to be times where, you bring up the softball team at the school, even though it might not be directly related.
Go to chess team, because you're always going to sports.
Sure. So
go to Glee Club.
Yes. Quiz Bowl.
Quiz Bowl. That's perfect.
Quiz Bowl's good. College Bowl, I believe. Right?
Okay.
College stuff, but which is something somebody who's into Quiz Bowl would know, of course. But
you're on a tangent. Let's
I really am.
Hold it in, Mike.
So anyway, my point being, if you want to talk about your national champion debate team or mock trial team, that might be on the institutional, social media, but also on, the admission side of things too. So there's going to be times where you're going to collaborate with the mothership, if you will. But yeah, absolutely. I think admissions has a very different voice, very different audience. So you should have some freedom to reach those people.
Okay, cool. I know there's another question in Jess, and I kind of see it, but I want Jess to read it. Jessica Stonish, by the way, makes everything easier in our lives, and we really appreciate her. She's reading your questions and chatting with you all. So, Jess, what's next?
While we're on the topic of marketing, we had another question come in. If your marketing team and departments are down in staffing, what would you suggest be the targeted outreach method?
I love this question.
That is good.
We talked about the importance of TikTok and YouTube. YouTube is huge. I know that. The problem with YouTube, Mike, and I want your answer on the original question, is that we talked about how YouTube is a little more involved with what you're posting. It doesn't necessarily have to be. You don't need a big budget to create an engaging video that's authentic and put your school in the best light, but that's kind of harder to create a YouTube video. So if your resources are low, can you still make YouTube a priority?
I think so. I think what you have to do is figure out, well, where am I going to have the best impact?
Yeah.
So if I invest time, if I invest resources, where is it going to have the biggest impact? So to me, maybe YouTube is that, maybe it isn't. Depends on the institution, depends on what your goals are. Again, are you in an enrollment team? Are you looking to drive more inquiries? Are you trying to improve your yield? All kind of depends on that. But yeah, I would look at, which efforts seem to have the best ROI for your team. And that's where I would focus first. Andy brought up a great point as a comment. So this is not a Mike Kochczynski, this is Andy. I want to make sure he gets credit. Student testimonials are really, really simple. Absolutely. I think student testimonials, alumni testimonials make a lot of sense, parent testimonials. In fact, one of my favorite campaigns that I've seen institutions start to incorporate is alumni letter writing. So you get your board of trustees, your alumni board of directors, your board of regents, and you tell them, hey, if you are from Philadelphia, we have this population of students in Philadelphia, we need you to write 500, little thank you cards or little notes to those people, and, break it up amongst 50 people. And it's a pretty easy lift when you start to get a bigger population doing those things.
Boy, this doesn't help Kim if your marketing department has not a lot of time. But letter writing is pretty powerful.
Mhm.
Like, when was the last time you got a handwritten letter in the mail on anything? But 100% open rate, 100% read rate on something like that.
And you can automate some things through to, through different systems. Like, I know with Cadence, we can obviously schedule messages to go out. CRMs have comm flows. We can integrate with those things too. So
Yeah.
all that's smart.
Segment your text is very
Yes.
important, and it's very easy to do in Cadence. Jess, what do we have? We have about 15 minutes left, I believe, in our discussion.
Yep. One more thing for Kim. If your team is on the leaner side, there are free social media scheduling tools. Buffer, for example, I've used Buffer in the past, and it allows you to get unique posts out to different channels. It's something that's free. It's something that can maybe save a little bit of time for your team. When in doubt, look for some kind of solution that can help your team scale with the limited resources that it has. So Buffer is a good one, but there are other ones out there. So going to another question, when you legally have to get a large amount of information, we love legalities questions. When you have to legally get out a large amount of information, more than you know a student will read in an email, how do you get them to read what they need to?
Boy, it's not like a car commercial where they can take the legal stuff and speed it up to a rate at which no one can understand
That'd
what's
be ideal.
possibly happening. I don't know how that's still legal, but they get away with it. So that's a good question. There are always parts of an email that people accept are there and don't read. For instance, my email signature, because it has information that would answer the question you just asked me. So putting it in a signature, I don't know if that covers the legalities, though, if you put that information in a signature.
It would, and then possibly, depending on what that information is, the state, et cetera. But, a lot of that is just, you can compel it into the form. And if a student doesn't want to fill it out, like, unfortunately, there are certain things, budgets, laws, regulations, that they're just going to be there, and you have to deal with those hurdles. And you should find technology that, makes you deal with the hurdles you have to deal with, as opposed to other hurdles that you don't have to deal with.
And if you have information, and this isn't really even just legal information in an email, but this is about texting, this is about email, this is about anything. Make sure the most important information is first.
Mhm.
And that could be like an article on your website or whatever. Make sure it's digestible and as short as possible. Bulleted out and bracketed. Use bullets all of the time. People read things and it's so digestible. There's a pattern to reading any information you get. Use bullets, use subheads, use things like that. Change the font in your subheads. If you're using a text, think about the first 4 words you're sending, because that's what they're going to see. And if the text says regarding your, I'm not reading that. If it says, hey, Mike, okay, I might not think too
Halfway
much
there.
about that. Yeah, you're halfway there to a conversation. So if it's important, say it's important without saying something like urgent in all caps, because that's robotic. So if you've been on any of our discussions before, we always say this, but like, be as conversational as possible, get to the point as soon as possible. And, that can help cover some of the bases. And then later on, when there's something that has to be there, they'll already know the important information.
Absolutely. Agree with that.
Another question we had come through, when do you think is an optimal time to host virtual events?
Not Friday.
Well, I think it depends on the event, the population, time of year. There's lots of variables there. All things being equal, to use the cliche, probably late afternoon, early evening. You want to catch students, after band practice, after, the sporting event, whatever it might be. But, before they're sitting down with their family, or, depending on if it's an information session, you might want it, right before they're sitting down to dinner, at the very beginning of dinner, those sorts of things. But it really depends on the audience. And,
Yeah, I feel bad. I said not Friday, but some events, depending on which department or what the event is, that might be ideal for them. We try and host our events right here sometime around lunchtime, because that's when you can sit down and turn your camera off and eat some French fries or something. So, that's a good time for you to take in this kind of information. What's going on in a student's life? Are you talking about high school students? When's the best time to reach them? Mike's advice would be perfect for a high school student, and when to reach them. But if you're talking about post-traditional students and or prospects, when's the best time to reach them? Probably that 6 p.m. time, when they're done with work, when they might have their family settled in. So it really does depend on the department or the audience. I guess, email us your specific use case and we'll try and help out on that. We love answering questions. It's Greg and Mike at mongooseresearch.com. So we can't answer everyone's questions all at the same time, but we're super friendly. We love answering questions.
So we had a question come in. Any other tips for texting students? I know.
Oh
that
my goodness.
I
We
know.
only asked
So
you with 10
many.
minutes left. So yeah.
I know that's our favorite topic, but
I feel like I should be in a boxing corner spitting into a bucket right now, ready to come out for the next round. When to text students. So we've got something on this.
yeah, do you want to throw out maybe our top 3?
Go ahead, Mike.
Sure. Every text you send should be helpful. It should be very human, and it should have a very clear call to action. So if you're doing those 3 things, you're probably doing 85 to 90% of what you need to do. If you want to add flair, go for it. If you want to use links, make sure they are the full URL, not a bit.ly or a shortened link of some kind. But that's pretty much it with students. If they're helpful, engaging, again, personalized, all those sorts of things, it's probably going to land well.
Just to add to what Mike said, and he said by engaging, like ask a question, like, with every text, ask a question. That way, even if it's not the question that they want to ask, they know that they can ask you a question if they need to. And when Mike said add flair, it doesn't matter the audience's age, use emojis. They're super fun, when appropriate, obviously, but emojis, don't be afraid of them. There are plenty of good ones. Every single presentation we mentioned, this website where you can go to check to make sure emojis are not like, offline or anything like that. Emojipedia.
Yes, emojipedia.org, I believe.
We mentioned it. You're probably sick of hearing about it.
It's a great resource.
Yeah. So, ask a question, make sure it's engaging, make sure that text is something when they open it, they'll think, I wanted that text. Because if you might not construe a text as spam, if a student doesn't want it, it's spam.
We had a question coming around YouTube. How do you get around ads on YouTube? So this example, one of our competitors' ads came up when we tested a video that we wanted to use. So looking at YouTube advertising and competitors finding their way onto your posts.
Boy, I wasn't prepared, and the rug has
nuts.
been pulled out from underneath me. So I can't tell you how to get by ads. I don't know how that would be possible. You can fight fire with fire and make sure your school has ads. You can address it if it's a real problem, and every single time someone watches a video from mongooseresearch.com, anti-mongooseresearch.com as an ad, you may have seen that, but we can do that. So you can address it in your video, and that might be a fun way to do it. But boy, I don't know how to get past ads. Maybe there's some kind of premium accounts you can have with YouTube that I would have to look into. So I apologize.
Lexi could help us with that.
Oh,
We have a social media person, Lexi, who's amazing.
If Lexi is here, she needs to chat and answer to
Yes.
that. If not, we're going to pin that
gonna research
question and we're going to come back to you for an answer. So make sure you reach out to us if you also want to know the answer to that. But whoever asked that question,
It's a great question.
we are going to have an answer for you. We have failed. We're failures. It's a great question. So,
Great way to end too.
yeah, that's right. Yes. Anyone else have a question we can't answer?
We had one more sneak in. So because of COVID, we've seen a gap year and high school dropout rates have increased over the past 2 years. What are the best ways to collect information on this population when the ACT, SAT, Department of Education, all of that information is limited?
We did address this sooner, but that's fine. We don't mind talking about it again. Other ways to collect information, that's tough.
I think you have, if a student is in a stop out, dropout phase, it's very tough to get that information. I think on the front end, getting that information is always better. So for example, when we get closer to the fake me first enrollment date that institutions have coming up, we see an uptick in institutions that text, are you still interested in X university? And students who say, yes, great. What questions do you have? How can I help you? Here's a link to complete your deposit. For students who say no, okay, well, where are you going instead? Or what are you up to next? And that does two things. One, it's good to know, where students are going. Are they going to competitor institution, et cetera? But, in cases where students says, I just realized my family and I talked, we can't afford this school, you might have grants, you might have aid available to that student. And I think one of the most rewarding parts of my job is learning those stories in micro, not so much macro, but learning about those, like the random student who got this random grant or got this opportunity because of texting. So I think being proactive in getting to students before they get to that point is really important.
Yeah, so it's not really an answer to the question, but
Right.
getting efficient with your time and sending out a text at the appropriate time that just asked a yes, no, maybe question, like, are you interested in Mongoose University? Yes, no, maybe. If they're not interested, that's a quick no, and that's going to save you from having to communicate with that student down the line. And if they change their mind, they can always reach back out to you, knowing that they answered no at that point in time. So, it echoes what Mike had said, but setting yourself up for success down the road and being as efficient as possible by narrowing down your population of people that you're texting to. I'm not sure if we even have time for another question. Do we have time for one more question, or is there no more questions?
At the end, we've hit the end of our questions.
Wow,
we did
this was
great.
fun.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for
Yes.
joining me. Once again, you're going to be receiving a recording of our FYI presentation. Mike and I would love to communicate with anyone who might want to communicate with us. That is our information. Jessica, is it up on the screen, our email addresses? I can't see whether or not it is.
I'm not seeing it.
Okay, well, I'm just not great at doing that right now. Mike@mongooseresearch.com, Greg@mongooseresearch.com. Those are our email addresses. We'd love to answer any questions you have if we did not get to that. Thank you so much for joining us and for being a part of the Mongoose Higher Ed community. We have another episode coming up in 2 weeks, and we hope that you join us for that. Thank you very much.
Take care. Thank you so much.